Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're jumping into something really fascinating, prompted by your curiosity, actually.
Mm.
Undersea living and research.
Yeah, it's a fantastic topic.
We've got quite a bit to draw on here.
Yeah.
There's this great chapter, chapter 46 in Hyperbaric Medicine Practice. It really digs into ocean exploration, living deep
A
down.
really solid source for this stuff.
Absolutely. And our mission, well, it's basically to pull out the really compelling stuff, the important bits
Yeah.
about how we've tried to, actually live and work beneath the waves.
From the early days right up to what might be next.
Exactly. We'll look at the history, the research, future possibilities, and how it all connects scientifically and economically.
And it's funny, the ocean's always had this hold on us, hasn't it?
Totally.
I mean, you think back to Poseidon or Jules Verne, right? 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It captures that deep fascination. And you can trace the tech, too. From, ancient divers maybe using air bladders all the way to modern SQB, advanced subs, even nuclear submarines that are basically small underwater towns.
It shows that drive, that constant push to explore down there.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's get into some of those early, really ambitious attempts. The 60s, Jacques Cousteau, the Conshelf stations. What are the key things they learned from those first habitats?
Well, Cousteau was interesting because he wasn't just about the science. He really wanted people to care about the ocean. So Conshelf I, back in '62, that was the first crucial step.
Right.
Small habitat, maybe 33 feet down off France. Housed 2 or 3 aquanauts for a week.
Just a week to start?
Just a week, yeah. But they were diving a lot,
Yeah.
over 5 hours every day. And constant medical exam.
So understanding the physiology was key.
Exactly. How does the human body actually function down there? That was the fundamental question they started answering.
And then they scaled it up pretty significantly with Conshelf II in the Red Sea. What were the big leaps there?
Oh, huge leaps. Conshelf II in '63 was way more ambitious. 6 aquanauts, 30 days straight at that same 33-foot depth, but this time off Sudan.
30 days.
Yeah. And here's a really key thing for pushing deeper. They also had a smaller habitat, deeper down at 100 feet.
Okay.
2 divers lived there for a week, but they weren't breathing normal air. They used a mix of helium and oxygen heliox.
Why the switch?
Well, the nitrogen in regular air under pressure, it has this narcotic effect, right? Nitrogen narcosis. Makes you feel dizzy, judgment gets impaired. It's a major barrier to going deep.
Right.
So using heliox basically cracked that problem for that depth. It allowed them to work effectively deeper down.
It's a huge advance.
Massive. And they also experimented with breathing pure oxygen during their ascent, during decompression.
To prevent the bends.
Exactly, decompression sickness. And it worked really well, apparently. High success rate. Plus, they filmed it all. Made an Academy Award-winning documentary, which really got the public interested in the oceans, right when everyone was obsessed with the space race. Made the underwater world seem just as exciting.
So while everyone's looking up, Cousteau's making waves, literally getting people excited about down below. Then came Conshelf III. What did that add?
Conshelf III in '65, that was about pushing the depth limit for working long-term. They went down to 336 feet.
Whoa, that's deep.
Yeah, in the med. 6 divers, 3 weeks. So this really advanced the actual techniques for deep-sea diving.
Yeah.
And they were looking at industrial stuff, too, like protocols for underwater drilling, construction.
Practical applications.
Right. Those Conshelf projects, they were genuinely groundbreaking, showed what was actually possible for living and working underwater for extended periods.
Okay, so following on from Cousteau, you have the U.S. Navy's CA lab projects. These sound like they had maybe a more military or fundamental research angle?
They did, yeah. The CA labs, there were 3 main ones. They really focused on something called saturation diving.
Saturation diving, explain that a bit.
Sure. So if you stay underwater long enough, your body tissues become fully saturated with the inert gases in whatever you're breathing, helium, nitrogen, whatever.
Yeah.
Once you're saturated, you can stay at that depth for a really long time, days or weeks. And you only have to do one long decompression at the very end instead of decompressing after every single dive.
So much more efficient for working down there.
Exactly. Way more bottom time. So Sea Lab I, that was 64, off Aruba, 192 feet down. 4 divers, they stayed 11 days. The goal was actually 21, but a storm cut it short.
Still impressive. What were they figuring out?
Really practical stuff. How to actually put a habitat on the seabed in the open ocean, how to manage the umbilicals for air and communications, controlling humidity inside, which is a big issue, and even unscrambling helium speech.
Right, the Donald Duck voice.
Exactly. That high-pitched voice is hard to understand. And amazingly, that original Sea Lab I habitat, It's still around. It's in Panama City Beach, Florida.
No way. A piece of history you can actually see.
Uh-huh.
So what about Sealab 2?
Sealab II, they put that in La Jolla Canyon off Southern California. Bit deeper, around 205 feet. They did things a bit differently, rotated several crews through, each staying for about 15 days.
So more people got the experience.
Yeah, and they tested new tools, salvage methods, new types of dry suits. And Scott Carpenter, the astronaut, he became an aquanaut too and set a record on Sealab 2. Stayed down for 30 continuous days.
An astronaut turned aquanaut. 30 days, matching Cousteau's team. But then Sealab 3? That sounds like where things took a difficult turn.
Yeah, unfortunately. Sealab III, this was 1969 off San Clemente Island, California. They were aiming much deeper, 610 feet.
Wow, quite a jump.
Huge jump, but it was just plagued with problems from the start. Technical issues, lots of leaks in the habitat.
Not what you want at 600 feet.
Definitely not. And then, tragically, during an attempt to repair the habitat, one of the divers, Barry L. Cannon, he died.
Oh no, what happened?
It was carbon dioxide poisoning. The CO2 scrubber in his breathing gear wasn't working properly.
Devastating.
Absolutely. And that was basically the end of the Sealab program. They terminated it right after that, and Sealab III itself was just scrapped. A really stark reminder of just how dangerous this kind of exploration is.
A very sobering lesson. Okay, let's jump forward a bit. We still have Cousteau's legacy alive with Aquarius down in the Florida Keys. You mentioned this is the world's only permanent undersea lab.
That's right. It's still operational, which is pretty remarkable. Aquarius sits about 62 feet deep. Initially, its main job was marine research, studying coral reefs, watching marine life.
Makes sense for the Keys.
Totally. NOAA owned it for a long time, from 86 to 2012, but now it's run by Florida International University, and it's become this amazing collaborative platform.
How so?
Well, NASA uses it for their NEMO missions.
Wow.
NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations. Basically, they simulate space missions underwater. It helps train astronauts, test procedures, equipment. The isolation and environment have parallels to space.
That's clever, using the ocean to prepare for space.
Yeah. And the Navy uses it for saturation dive training. Plus, lots of universities and private researchers do work there. It's hosted over 120 missions, produced something like 600 research papers, and incredible scientific output from one facility.
That's a huge contribution.
Yeah.
And Fabien Cousteau, Jacques' grandson, he spent a whole month down there, right? 31 days.
He did, back in 2014, Mission 31.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just about breaking his grandfather's Conshelf II record, though he did that.
Right.
It was about that long-term living experience without the constant up and down of decompression. They figured the research they did in that month was maybe equivalent to 3 years of normal surface diving.
Wow. That efficient, huh?
Yeah. And they did a lot of public outreach, too, live video chats from underwater. Research-wise, they looked at physiological effects, medical stuff from being isolated under pressure about 3 atmospheres down there.
Any weird findings?
A couple of interesting things they noticed. Hair seemed to grow faster, and their sense of taste got dulled.
Huh.
Yeah. They expect about 10 research papers just from the data gathered on that one mission. Really shows the value of being able to stay down and work continuously.
It really does. And Aquarius was set to host another big one, Project Poseidon. Sounds ambitious.
Very ambitious. The plan was for it to start back in May 2018, using Aquarius for a record 100 days straight.
100 days.
Yeah, with a really diverse team. Doctors, divers, astronauts, aquanauts, researchers. Some core people like Nicole Stott, former astronaut, experienced saturation diver herself, were going to stay the whole time. Others would rotate in for shorter missions.
What are the big goals?
Super wide-ranging. Marine biology, obviously, but also human health and performance at depth. Psychological effects of isolation, engineering both aquatic and aerospace-related telemedicine, space analog research again, robotics, how humans and machines work together underwater.
A real interdisciplinary effort.
Totally.
Wow.
Academia, government, industry, all meant to be involved.
And NASA's interest was specifically testing Mars rovers underwater.
Pretty much, yeah. Testing rovers in an environment that throws up some similar challenges to Mars, navigating difficult terrain, remote operation, that kind of thing. The whole project was also designed to, boost public interest, again, in undersea exploration, maybe spark some more innovation.
It makes sense. It's easy to get caught up in space exploration, right? And the funding reflects that. You mentioned NASA spending over $575 billion between 58 and 2014. That's a staggering amount.
It is, and the public fascination is definitely there, but the argument is, what have we gotten back for it? And the answer is Actually, quite a lot in terms of spin-offs.
Right, the technologies that filter down into everyday life.
Exactly. Things we totally take for granted now. Satellite tech is maybe the biggest one. Climate monitoring, global communications, TV signals, weather forecasts, GPS in your phone.
All rely on satellites.
And even medical imaging, like CT scans, MRIs, ultrasound. The computing power needed for that owes a lot to early satellite image processing. Then there's materials like aerogel, that super insulator.
Placed in boots and stuff.
Yeah, boots, home insulation, cars, medical gear, or the lightweight, fire-resistant fabrics developed for spacesuits. Now firefighters use them.
Okay, that makes sense.
Digital fly-by-wire systems in modern airplanes, space program origins, medical robotics for super precise surgery, even remote surgery. Big boosts from space tech R&D.
It seems like the extreme requirements of Space Force innovation that wouldn't happen otherwise.
That's exactly it. It pushes the boundaries in materials, comms, medicine, miniaturization. And then those breakthroughs find uses back here on Earth, often in unexpected ways.
Are there more specific medical examples? I think the sources mentioned quite a few.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's Meldo-Q for melanoma detection, endovascular brachytherapy that's using radiation inside blood vessels to stop them re-narrowing after procedures, tiny implantable sensors to measure radiation doses accurately during cancer treatment, shape memory alloys,
What are those?
metals that can return to a specific shape after being deformed, used in things like surgical staples or braces for your teeth.
Oh,
Even the camera tech in your phone owes something to the faint object camera on the Hubble Space Telescope. That tech improved digital imaging across the board, video cameras, photocopiers, even analyzing chemical reactions in the brain.
it's amazing how interconnected it all is.
It really is. There's also this thing called high-performance capillary electrophoresis, miniaturized thanks to space needs, which can now identify diseases really fast on a tiny chip. And the list just keeps going. Solar panels, implantable heart monitors, water filters, freeze-dried foods, smarter prosthetics, loads of stuff.
It's definitely a compelling list of benefits from space investment. But turning back to the oceans, the sources argue really strongly that the potential there is just immense, calling it a breadbasket for future innovation. Why such huge promise?
Well, it really comes down to the sheer scale and the unknown. The ocean covers most of our planet, holds almost all the living space, the biosphere volume.
Right, we always hear we know less about the ocean floor than the surface of the moon.
And it's largely true. It's incredibly diverse, biologically, way more fundamental animal groups, phyla, than on land. And we're only just starting to tap into that.
So more potential for discovery.
Huge potential. They estimate something like 18,000 natural products already identified from marine sources, nearly 5,000 patents. And that number's growing fast, like 12% a year recently. Marine product use just exploded compared to previous decades.
Wow.
And think about the extreme environments, deep-sea trenches like the Marianas Trench, hydrothermal vents. Organisms living there have unique adaptations, unique genes. That's a potential goldmine for novel biomaterials, enzymes, you name it. It's like this vast, unexplored biological library.
A biological dark matter, as one source put it. Okay, so give us some concrete examples. What kind of resources are we finding?
Okay, some amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Sea urchin genetics. They're helping us understand fundamental processes related to human diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer, muscular dystrophy.
From sea urchins.
Then you've got marine bacteria, Vibrio species, that make a compound similar to heparin, the blood thinner. Fish living in Antarctica produce natural antifreeze proteins.
Seriously, antifreeze.
Yeah, peptides and glycopeptides. Keeps their blood from freezing. Imagine the applications. And fish also produce these things called CP-CAPs, cationic antimicrobial peptides.
What do they do?
They seem to fight everything. Bacteria, viruses, fungi, even some cancer cells. Huge potential maybe for treating sepsis. Even fish slime.
Fish slime.
Seriously. The mucus and molecules on their skin are being looked at for ultra-low friction coatings. Think medical devices, catheters, heart valves, implants where you want to prevent friction or blood clots.
That's incredible. And I assume this translates into actual drug development, too.
Oh, massively. New antifungal agents are coming from marine organisms like ursinol A, which seems to be effective but not very toxic. Same for antituberculosis drugs. There's a compound from a bryozoan, sort of a moss animal called bryostatin 1.
What's special about that?
It shows promise for protecting bone marrow during radiation therapy and maybe even stimulating the immune system to fight cancer. Then there are actinomycetes, kind of like fungi from the seabed, producing selenosporamide A.
And that does.
Early signs suggest it might inhibit tumor growth breast, colon, lung cancers. And remember, a lot of existing anti-cancer drugs, like taxoids and vinca alkaloids, were originally derived from natural products, just land-based ones. The ocean is a whole new frontier for that.
It really sounds like it. Any other major sources?
Sea squirts are proving really interesting. One type, Tridemnum solidum from the Caribbean, gives us didemnin B, which seems to fight tumors by stopping protein synthesis. Showed some effect in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Another sea squirt, Aplidium albicans, is the source of aplidine, which might work against resistant leukemia by blocking DNA and protein making and cutting off nutrients to tumors.
Amazing diversity of action.
Yeah. And sponges, too. Tethia, helicondria, they're sources for compounds used in chemotherapy, antibiotics, antivirals already. Even the fats from marine life, the polyunsaturated fatty acids, are being explored for new ways to deliver medications inside the body. And shifting gears slightly, some marine bacteria, Pseudomonas, can actually remove heavy metals like cadmium from polluted water.
So environmental cleanup potential, too. You mentioned barnacles earlier, that sticky protein.
Right, that polyphenolic protein. It lets barnacles stick like crazy to almost anything: metal, rock, plastic, even bone or skin. The potential for a super strong surgical glue is huge.
So that would be revolutionary.
Absolutely. And it goes both ways. NASA tech developed for space is being adapted for Navy divers now. Better suits for high pressure, extreme temperatures, chemical hazards, and there's even research, get this, into a suit that uses a liquid, a perfluorocarbon mixture, packed with oxygen.
Breathing liquid, like in the movies.
Kind of. The lungs would extract the oxygen, and a mechanical gill system would remove the CO2. Still very experimental, but imagine the possibilities for deep diving.
Science fiction territory again. So all these tech advances are making the deep ocean more accessible.
Definitely. These new suit concepts, new habitat designs for longer stays, vehicles like James Cameron's Deep-Sea Challenger that went to the bottom of the Marianas Trench, plus autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, getting smarter with AI. It's all opening up the depths.
There's a catch, isn't there? A concern about funding priorities.
There is. Dr. Sylvia Earle, the famous oceanographer, she's pointed out that while other countries, China, France, India, Russia, are investing in new manned subs that can go really deep, like 6,000 meters,
Okay.
U.S. funding for similar deep-sea exploration is actually being cut back. That raises real questions about U.S. leadership in ocean science and, managing ocean resources responsibly. It feels like a potential imbalance.
Yeah, that does seem like a disconnect, especially when you compare it to the biotech sector. The U.S. biotech industry is massive, right? Lots of jobs, huge revenues.
Absolutely massive. Employed over 1.6 million people back in 2013, generated well over $500 billion in revenue in 2008, even grew jobs during the recession. It's a powerhouse.
Yet the sources say government investment here lags behind some other countries.
That's the observation, yeah. Despite the sector's strength, the level of direct government R&D funding specifically earmarked for biotech might not be keeping pace with, say, China, which has pledged enormous sums.
Interesting.
It's even led to situations where big U.S. pharma companies partner with Chinese research groups, which isn't necessarily bad, but it perhaps signals that we could be doing more domestically to foster that innovation with federal support.
And how does the ocean exploration economy, such as it is, stack up against the space sector globally?
Well, the global space industry is also huge, employs maybe 900,000 people, generates over $250 billion directly. Trying to pin down the exact value of all those space spin-offs is tricky, but NASA's own spin-off publication has featured over 1,750 different technologies across countless industries since the 70s, so the indirect impact is clearly enormous.
But for direct funding.
That's where the comparison gets stark, when you look at where the R&D money actually goes.
So let's get into those numbers. What did the U.S. R&D spending look like around, say, 2014, 2015?
Okay, so total U.S. R&D spending was projected at around $465 billion for 2014, with the federal government kicking in about $123 billion of that. For 2015, the federal R&D portion was projected around $135 billion.
Big numbers overall, but how was it sliced up?
Right, the allocation tells the story. Department of Defense gets a huge chunk, naturally around $64 billion in 2015. National Institutes of Health, NIH, big medical research funder, about $30 billion.
Okay.
NASA's total budget was around $18 billion, with maybe $11.6 billion. That considered R&D, still a lot, but less than 0.5% of the total federal budget. Department of Energy, about $12 billion. USDA, $2.4 billion.
Now, where does ocean stuff fit in, NOAA?
Right. NOAA's total budget was around $5.5 billion, but the R&D portion was only about $688 million. And here's the kicker. The specific funding for ocean exploration and research within that, just $29.1 million.
$29 million, compared to billions for space and defense.
Exactly. Fisheries got more, around $500 million. Protected species, $186 million. Even the NSF, the National Science Foundation, its total budget was $5.7 billion. But specific biotech research funding was only around $29 million, too.
Wow.
And look at the big oceanographic institutions, Woods Hole, Scripps, Harbor Branch. Their total operating revenues are in the low hundreds of millions, with research funding making up a large part. But again, it pales massively compared to space funding.
And the sources make an even broader comparison, don't they, to things like entertainment spending?
Yeah, it's pretty eye-opening. Americans spend something approaching $1 trillion a year on entertainment, alcohol, tobacco, stuff like that. That's like 60-something times the entire NASA budget and literally thousands of times more than what goes into NOAA's ocean exploration research budget.
That perspective really highlights the funding disparity. And this brings us right into the tricky area of intellectual property, especially with all these potential new discoveries from marine life.
It's a really thorny issue. On one side, you have the argument that patenting genes, for instance, provides the incentive needed for companies to invest in discovering and developing new drugs or materials. Drives innovation.
Makes sense.
But the flip side is that patents could stifle further research by locking up access to fundamental genetic information. And specifically in the oceans, there's a worry it could lead to a kind of gold rush mentality. Companies scrambling to collect specimens from fragile environments before someone else does, potentially causing damage.
And the ethics of patenting life forms, even genes, is still debated, right?
Very much so. Court decisions have been contradictory. Plus, you get into the issue of companies from wealthy nations finding valuable genetic resources in the waters of developing nations or in international waters. Who really owns that? Is it ethical bioprospecting, just searching for useful things? Or is it biopiracy, taking resources without fair compensation or permission?
Are there examples of that causing problems?
Oh yeah. The classic example is Eli Lilly developing major anti-cancer drugs from the rosy periwinkle plant found in Madagascar. Madagascar apparently saw little to no financial benefit from it for decades.
Ouch.
And then there was a big fight when W.R. Grace tried to patent an insecticide based on extracts from the neem tree, which has been used in India for centuries. Huge protests there.
So what's been done to try and fix this?
Well, these kinds of issues led to international agreements. There's the TRIPS agreement, trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, and the Convention on Biological Diversity, or CBD. They try to set rules.
And specifically for genetic resources.
The CBD led to the Nagoya Protocol in 2010, which is all about access and benefit sharing. The idea is to ensure that when genetic resources are accessed, the benefits derived from them, like profits from a new drug, are shared fairly with the country or community where they originated.
Does it work?
Well, international law is complicated. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, sets rules for ocean use, but defining clear ownership of biological resources in the vast ocean, especially beyond national borders, is tough. Look at the disputes in the South China Sea. They involve resource claims. Ultimately, laws and treaties are only as good as the willingness of countries to follow and enforce them. And in international waters, the profit motive can be a very strong incentive for, well, piracy, basically.
And this is all happening while the oceans themselves are facing huge environmental threats, right? Threatening the very biodiversity we're hoping to learn from.
Exactly. That's the tragic irony. There's this massive concern that we're not doing nearly enough to protect these marine genetic resources from being destroyed before we even understand them. Biodiversity loss is accelerating. Some estimates suggest 30, maybe even 50% of species could face extinction by mid-century. We're losing dozens every day.
What are the main drivers of that loss in the oceans?
The big ones are overfishing, dumping all sorts of waste plastics, chemicals, sewage, the physical destruction of coastal habitats like mangroves and coral reefs. One projection even suggested a potential collapse of all commercially fished species by 2048 if trends continue.
That's terrifying.
It is. And coral reefs are especially vulnerable. Maybe a third to two-thirds are already badly damaged or dying. If the reefs go, countless species that depend on them go too.
So we need serious policy changes.
Absolutely. Stronger government and international action is critical to prevent irreversible damage. The sources even suggest that research bodies, like IRBs that approve scientific studies, should perhaps make approvals contingent on researchers using sustainable harvesting methods and protecting the local environment and community interests.
Makes sense.
We can't just focus on, say, colonizing Mars while letting our own planet's oceans degrade. That would cut off this incredible source of potential biotech innovation and just allow the unchecked exploitation to continue.
It's a stark warning. Yet, despite all these challenges, there's still this almost futuristic vision for actually living underwater. Not just visiting, but setting up homes.
Yeah, it's got that sci-fi appeal, doesn't it? Like the Jetsons, but under the sea. Submerged houses with huge windows looking out onto coral reefs.
Is anyone actually doing this?
Well, private companies are definitely moving in that direction. They're using the know-how from Sea Lab, from Aquarius, from decades of submarine design. We're seeing underwater restaurants, plans for resorts in places like Fiji and Dubai. One company, U.S. Submarine Structures, is literally designing custom underwater homes, the H2OME project.
Underwater estates. Seriously.
Yep. They list a 1,250 square foot model for around $4 million and a bigger 3,600 square foot one for $12 million, plus installation costs, of course.
Wow. Okay, so how do you build something like that?
It's pretty cool, actually. They build the main living pods, the modules with the big acrylic windows on land, and then they transport them out and install them on the seabed, usually relatively shallow, maybe 30 feet or so. They're connected back to land by an umbilical that carries power, air, water communications. And the different pods are linked together underwater by like a submerged corridor or docking structure. Importantly, they design them so individual pods can be detached and brought to the surface for maintenance if needed.
And how do people get down there?
Usually an elevator from a pier or structure on the surface takes you down into the pressurized underwater environment, so you arrive dry and comfortable.
What about the environmental impact? Sticking big structures on the seabed.
That's a major consideration, yeah. The goal, at least stated by developers like those behind the Fiji resort concept, is minimal footprint. The main contact points are pillars supporting the structure. And the hope, or the plan, is that the structure itself will actually encourage marine life. Coral could grow on it, fish could congregate, turning it into an artificial reef.
So it could become part of the ecosystem.
That's the idea, creating a habitat where humans and marine life coexist and hopefully inspiring people who visit or live there to care more about ocean conservation.
It's certainly a compelling vision. Okay, that really brings us towards the end of our deep dive today. It feels like the sources paint a picture where, ocean research has already given us a lot of valuable medicines, biomedical tools, arguably at a much lower cost relative to the huge investment in space.
That's definitely a key takeaway. When you contrast the sheer cost, the return on investment from marine exploration and biotechnology looks incredibly promising, even with the comparatively tiny funding it's received so far.
And it highlights that disparity in human exploration itself, doesn't it? Hundreds of people have been to space, a dozen walked on the moon.
Right. And how many have been to the very deepest part of the ocean, the Challenger Deep? Only 3 people, ever. And only for very brief visits, starting way back in 1960. It really shows where our focus has and hasn't been.
So the final message isn't really less space funding, is it? It's more about much more ocean funding.
Exactly. It's not an either. It's about recognizing the absolutely critical importance of understanding our own planet's oceans, not just for potential discoveries and innovations, but for the fundamental health and continuation of life on Earth. We need to invest significantly more in exploring and protecting this realm.
It's not just this beautiful, mysterious place. It's vital for our future.
Precisely. It's fundamental.
Which leaves us with a final question for you, our listeners, to think about. Given everything we've discussed, the vast untapped potential of the oceans, the incredible biodiversity, the relatively small investment compared to space, what truly game-changing discoveries, what cures, what technologies might we be missing out on right now, simply because we haven't prioritized the exploration and understanding of our own planet's final frontier?